In this video, we will look at the overview report page. At the top, we've got the date range selectors. Here you can choose your start date and the from and your end date in the to. It's important to note that we allow a 3-month moving window. So your to date has to be within 3 months of your from date. Then once you've set your dates, you can see that information populates below. We've got 2 blocks, show stats for when communicating with. So at the moment we're looking at show stats for my company when communicating with, when we say anybody, it's all other information. So it's internal and external emails. So you can see there's been 597 conversations, 921 emails received, and 263 emails sent. So you can see that a conversation could include multiple emails received and multiple emails sent. But we'll get into that in more detail when we look at these statistics specifically. If I click on more, you can see that we break out conversations into inbound conversations, which are conversations started by anyone external to who is on your Tight Reply system. Outbound conversations are any conversation started by someone on your Tight Reply system. Internal conversations are anyone who is communicating between your same domain name. And then you can see how many conversations have replies and how many conversations where you have been the respondent. So not only part of the conversation, but also actually being the respondent. Then if you click on less, you can minimize those boxes. If I click on the more for emails received, you can see that emails received is broken out into initial emails received, that is the start of a new conversation. So how many emails were at the start of a new conversation? Total reply emails received, so that's how many replies have been received, including replies and reply all emails. And then you've got total forward emails, that's how many emails you've received that have been forwarded into your company. Finally, if we look at the emails sent column, we also break emails sent down into initial emails sent. So that's how many emails have been sent to start a conversation. How many replies have been sent, so that's replies and reply alls by your company. And total forwards is how many emails have been forwarded. So it's important to note that these stats are always in relation to the top left block where it says show stats for, and in this case it's showing stats for your company. All right. Now we can look at the email response time statistics. So you can see here it says that the average initial reply time is 10 hours and 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And that's the number in green. The number in green takes business hours into account, whereas the number in blue does not take business hours into account. So that is the total raw time without including business hours. And the green number only looks at time that is passed within business hours. The average initial response time is the time it takes to respond to a new conversation. The average overall response time looks at the initial response as well as all subsequent responses within the conversation. If I click on more, you can see we break out. So even though the average initial reply time in this instance is 10 hours and 9 minutes, just less than 75% of the time, this company is responding within 1 hour. So less than 1 hour during business hours, they are responding 75% of the time. So it just allows you to get a better idea of that average because certain outliers will pull out the average. So you can see 88.06% of the time they're responding within 4 hours. And the same is true if you look at the overall average reply time or the average time to forward. So that's to give you some context around those averages. Let me minimize all of those. All right, then the next thing that we are going to look at is if we had to change, we're looking at showing stats for my company. So in the table below, you'll notice that all of the email addresses that appear there are email addresses that have been added to Time to Reply for tracking. So it's got the total number of conversations, the total number of emails received, and the total number of emails sent. Now you can see there that the conversations numbers will add up to more than the total above, because each of your agents could be part of the same conversation, so there can be overlap. Whereas the number above it are the unique number of conversations, the numbers just above the initial average reply time. Then we've got a whole host of different options that you can choose by simply ticking any of those boxes. And if we were to change this, I could just look at show stats for Dane instead of the whole company. You'll see that all of the information changes. So I've been involved in 500 conversations, I've received 707 emails and 214 sent, and my average initial response time is 11 hours and 16 minutes. But I respond, 72.41% of the time in less than an hour. So again, just giving some context to those numbers. And you can see my email behavior in the graph below. If you click on any of the key labels at the bottom of the graph, you can remove them from the graph. So that is my average initial response time behavior. You can see I had an outlier on that particular day, and that's probably what's bringing out my average. If you hover over any of the points, it'll give you the average for that particular day. You can see the gaps in the days as weekends. Sorry, the gaps in the graph as weekends. And that it was a public holiday. All right. If I was to open up the date range, again, you can see all of the information automatically updating when the date range is changed. If we look at that graph now, it gives you a better kind of idea. Of my response time behavior. So very quick, then went off the boil a bit, very quick, and again slightly slower. And that behavior will change from employee to employee and based on different job roles, etc. If I toggle on the average overall TTR and remove the average initial, you can see that that is my overall behavior, so a lot more consistent. Then I can put in the forwards. I can look at how many emails have been received. So a huge outlier there. That is when I was working on my customer support system and I was closing a lot of conversations. So I got over 1,000 emails from support tickets that hadn't been closed historically that are now closed on that particular day. So you can see 1,200 plus emails. And you can see how many emails have been sent and received on any of the days. And across a company or across different departments or teams, you might start picking up certain patterns where you're inundated on a certain day, and you might need to staff up. Typically, what we find is response times tend to be slower on a Monday because you're catching up from the weekend, and much faster Tuesday and Wednesday. All right, now we can look at stats for, I'm going to go stats for myself. Or, sorry, let me go, my company communicating with my company. So now you're looking at how your company is communicating internally and what the response time is internally. So you can see that your average initial response time between employees is 10 hours and 37 minutes. And if you click exclusively, that takes out any conversations that you had your two or more of your employees in the conversation, as well as some external parties. So you can see how that completely changes the statistics. When we are just communicating internally, the team is responding very quickly to one another. So that's what the exclusively button does. If I was to look at how Dane is responding to Devon, so this is how I am responding to one of my colleagues exclusively. You can see that we've had that many email conversations. The initial response time is very quick, as is the overall. And if we were now to take off exclusively, where we're both in conversation, those stats would change. And if I click that button, it swaps it around, and you can see that Devon is taking slightly longer to respond to me than I am taking to respond to him. So initial response time of 1 hour and 36 minutes, as opposed to I was responding to him in very quickly in 6 minutes or so. If I take off exclusively, you can see that that time goes out dramatically, but again, that's probably an outlier that's pulling out the statistics. So 50% of the time is responding within an hour. If we swap that around, see that on average I take 7 hours and 51, but 67.21% of the time I'm responding within an hour to those initial emails. If you hover over any of these points, there is a tooltip to explain to you what the metric is showing you. All right, now we can look at how I am responding to a particular customer. So you can enter in any customer's address or just their domain name, @BDO, etc. But I'll look at how I'm communicating with this particular customer. So if I update that, showing stats for Dane when communicating with Chris. So we've had 85 conversations, I've received 181 emails, and I've sent 110 emails. That's Chris and myself. And those are the email response time statistics. And if I click on that, we'll see how Chris, my customer, is responding back to me. So you can see that my customer is responding in 44 minutes to new emails that I send him, and 2 hours and 12 minutes as an overall average response time. So this particular customer is very on the ball. Now what we might find is that over time, that those response times start slipping, or the amount of conversations that we have starts slipping. And that's a way to kind of get an idea of whether that relationship is souring, whether the business might be slowing down. So it gives you some insight into how the communication is between yourself and a customer. I can look at how my whole company is responding to that particular customer. And if I do that, you can see who is responding. So Dane and Devin are having conversations. Robert is not having a conversation with Chris. And that's also interesting, because if you only saw one person on that line with information, and it was a very big account, you might decide, hang on, that's such a key account for us, we need to have more people speaking to that customer. So you can mitigate risk by using this tool to see who is communicating with important customers or suppliers. If we tick exclusively, we can see, okay, how are we dealing with Chris when no one else is in the conversation. And if you look at the message logs or conversation logs when you've got these same filters applied, you'll be able to see the raw information that we are using to produce these statistics. We've also got teams, so if you have a group of people in the same team, you can create a team using the menu on the left-hand side under Teams. In this particular instance, there's no one assigned to that team, and hence why that message is coming up. Let me just have a look if I can fix that quickly. So if I go to Teams, sorry, let me just go to Teams. You can see that under the US sales team, no one is assigned as a member. So if I click on Edit, I'll be able to just assign some people to that team. So let me just assign Dane and Devin. And then I can click on Add those two. So now if I go back to the overview report, you'll see that there's no longer an error, and you can see how that team is performing. So a team basically just allows you to group a number of different individuals together. It's different to a group mailbox. A group mailbox allows you to track how people are responding directly in relation to a group mailbox that they have been assigned to respond to. But we'll get into that in one of the later demos. So again, if I flip this around, we can have a look at how is... Let me just change that, sorry, to... How is my US sales team communicating with my company? So how is this team when communicating with my company? And don't forget, you can do this team to team, and it gives you an idea if there's any bottlenecks in terms of certain companies, certain teams within your company not communicating well, certain individuals not communicating well. You can cross-compare as you see fit. Here's an example of how's my US sales team doing when communicating with a particular customer. So again, I'm using this email address. Well, let's do it at the domain level. So instead of using a full email address, I'll just go to the domain. So if we were dealing with numerous people from BDO, or let's go something like Ingredion.com. This is how my US sales team is performing when dealing with anyone from ingredient.com. So we've had a few conversations. You can see our average initial response time is very quick. Overall is slightly slower. So again, my company to anybody. But this time we're going to use a subject line search. So that's in the top right hand side. So let's say, how is my company doing when demo is mentioned in the subject line? So you can see there, very, very fast when it comes to an average initial reply time to anything demo related. Those average overall time is also pretty good. Average time to forward is very long, but that's because I went back to some historical emails and forwarded them on to a sales rep to go and chase up on. So hence that's why that is out. So it makes sense in my particular instance.